Welcome to the special episode of Boyz podcast Off Topic, with just me, Malcolm. On today's special episode of Boyz podcast Off Topic, we're just going to talk about my programming history. As I said, this is going to be a different episode than we usually do. Basically, I started the programming back in November of 2018. I used to code batch files back then, and then I moved to C Sharp console C Sharp, and then by January of 2019 I moved to Windows Forms C Sharp. And basically, my first software which I remember I have done using batch was Presoft. It was popular at the time to make a batch operating system. But nowadays that's gone. And then on January, yes, I have developed my very first bundle of software for Windows. I believe Windows 10. Yes, Windows 10. It was. It was called Writersoft Office. Basically, you had a web browser and a word processor which could save files. I believe it was RTF, the first word processor used to save to RTF files. Yes, and the web browser used Internet Explorer. But essentially, the heart of the browser was Internet Explorer. And then I have developed Service Pack 2. I believe there was an external tools. I don't remember the name. That allowed you to make a better word processor essentially. But Service Pack 2 was the least popular one of the bundle of Office products basically. And then there was Service Pack 3, which was one of the best service packs in Office 2019. And then there was Bonus Plus, which I believe was the fourth service pack to Office 2019. And then 2020 came along basically, and the pandemic started, which didn't affect the code at all. But up to this point, I kept coding. Up to this point, I kept coding. In 2020, 2021, at that era, I started working on the search engine Skidaddle, which is online available at the moment. You can search it at I believe I changed the address, so I have to change that, but I believe it was Skidaddle SRC. Skidaddle SRC at webpages.com, and that's where you can access the search engine. But after Skidaddle, I basically went back to creating web browsers for Windows. That was in the early 2021. We're talking about that time in the early 2021. And around August, September, October, I believe it was August, I started working on a game of mine called TB City, which is a text-based city simulation game where it allowed you to simulate building a city essentially using it was a text-based game, and that was TB City. After that, TB City 2 was released shortly, and To be honest, TBCT2 didn't receive quite a good feedback I was expecting, so TBCT2 was taken down, literally, and TBCT3 was developed. TBCT3 is the last available TBCT game you can get at the moment. I am working on other TBCT projects which are coming really soon. Um, yeah, TBCT 3 was the last version of TBCT to use the same, essentially the same text based shell that was used from the first TBCT game to TBCT 3. And now we're moving to a more graphical interface for TBCT. At the moment, I'm working on the next version of TBCT, which is going to be released somewhere around February. Yes, because there was a bit of delay due to I was sick for a week during December. I couldn't work on the game, which means it had to be delayed a bit. And yes, I am working on other versions of TBCT, not just the TBCT version that is coming out very soon. I'm working on other versions of TBCT. For instance, TBCT 5, which is not coming yet, but there's been some new features implemented, which I'm not going to talk about in this podcast for obviously reasons that I'll be spoiling the game. Um, and also, there is a possibility of a trilogy coming back. Yes, this is what I wanted to talk about. There is a possibility of the first three games, TBCT 1, 2, and 3, being remastered and brought back to you, basically. So you can play the first three TBCT games, which will be remastered. Now, apart from that, there are other games currently in progress. That is why there has been a slight delay in everything. There is also a new game coming along, a simulation game, which I can't really talk about much yet because it hasn't been announced. But essentially, it uses a similar design principle to the next upcoming versions of TBCT. They have the same graphical interface, also known as Graphic Box 1.5, which is a graphical interface I have developed for future versions of TBCT and the new simulation game, which I am going to talk about either in the future podcasts, or I'm going to announce in the official. It could be announced in the official Boyz podcast or in this off-topic variant of El Boys podcast. Um, and apart from the games, there are other projects in mind, such as the web processor is coming back at some point, and the web browser. The web browser is going to be remastered and redeveloped, actually, not just remastered, uh, but it is going to have more features than older versions of browsers. For example, Mellington browser, Mellington Pasco, Mellington Navigator. All of those are going to be combined into one web browser, which is going to have a lot more features than data, to be honest. And that's expected around um, June, July of this year. Hopefully, that will be finished by then. But as you can see at the moment, TB City is getting more attention than the other projects, and for sure, because TB City has got quite the feedback, and basically that wraps up this unscripted podcast of the day. We'll see you in the podcast. Now, the next podcast won't be an off-topic one. It will be about toxic and abusive relationships, which will be on Sunday 29th. Yes, and we're going to have, as we probably said on the other off-topic, which was, I believe, yesterday, the off-topic episode, we're going to have two special members on the show, which I'm not going to reveal their names yet. And that's basically it for this podcast. I thank you all for taking the time to hear this, and we'll see you on Sunday. Thank you and goodbye.